You're kidding, right? My voice came out thin and shaky as I stared at the numbers on my phone, my heart thudding in my chest. Every penny I'd spent years saving for a down payment. Gone without a trace. "Where's my money, Maria?" I asked, barely above a whisper, but my mom didn't even bother to look up from her coffee. "Oh, relax, Juliana. It went to something important," she said, as if that settled it. Important. The word echoed in my mind, bitter and absurd. I felt my throat tighten like I might choke. "It's all gone." "Where did it go?" I asked again, but Maria only glanced sideways at Greg, my stepdad, who lounged beside her, grinning over his mug, swirling his coffee as if we were discussing a new movie, not the theft of my future. "The party," Maria answered with a flick of her wrist, as though she was telling me where to find the light switch. "We needed a little extra to make it special." Didn't compute. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense, couldn't possibly be real. "You used my savings to pay for your anniversary party?" I said, my hands trembling so hard that my phone nearly slipped from my grasp. "That was for my house. You had no right." Greg chuckled, finally jumping in, his tone smug. "We're your parents," he said, leaning back, his smile unfading. "We don't owe you anything, Juliana. Families share. You'll get over it." Let me back up for a second. I'm Juliana, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the afterthought in my own family. The shadow everyone overlooks when the lights are on. My dad died when I was 12, leaving behind not just memories, but a modest inheritance meant for me, something he hoped would give me a head start in life. He trusted Maria to safeguard it until I was old enough to use it wisely. Instead, she treated it like her own personal piggy bank. I let the little things slide for years. The emergencies, the mysterious withdrawals, the time she dipped into my fund to pay off Greg's mounting credit card debt. I stayed silent, convincing myself that maybe things would even out someday, that family meant compromise. But this was different. This wasn't a couple $100 here and there. Not a small loan that stung but could be forgiven. This was everything. Nearly $25,000, gone in a single night. Catering, decorations, some overpriced venue, all so they could impress their friends with how perfect their marriage was. The money I'd spent years scraping together, working late shifts, skipping vacations, living in a cramped apartment so I could save every spare dollar. I'd counted every penny, watched the balance grow with hope, imagined my own front door, my own space. And now, in one selfish move, they'd obliterated all of it. I wasn't just angry. I felt hollow, like the foundation beneath me had been yanked away. My faith in them, in family, cracked. I struggled to keep my voice even. "I want it back," I said, every word quivering with betrayal. "You're going to pay me back. Every cent." Maria rolled her eyes, sighing dramatically, and set her mug down with a clatter. "Don't be so dramatic, Juliana. It's not like you're homeless. You can always save more." "It's not about that," I snapped, my composure gone. "You stole from me. That money was mine. Dad left it for me." Greg's smirk grew wider, his eyes hard. "Technically, it was your dad's money. And we're your parents. We decide what's best for the family." That word family hit me like a slap. They'd always used it as a shield, a way to excuse every overstep, every dismissal of my feelings, every time they borrowed without asking, every time they brushed aside my needs for their own convenience. But this wasn't family. This was theft, plain and simple. And I realized, with a deep ache, that I'd been letting them get away with it for too long. "I'm not letting this go," I managed, my voice shaking but certain. Maria just shrugged, picked up her coffee, and sipped it with astonishing calm. "Do what you have to. But don't expect us to apologize. We did what was necessary." I left their house that day barely able to breathe. My chest felt tight, the air thick and suffocating. I walked in a daze, barely noticing the world around me. The first person I called was Elena, my best friend, the one person who'd always had my back. I paced my tiny apartment, my words tumbling out in broken bursts as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. "They're unbelievable," she said, her voice sharp with outrage. How could they think this is okay? How could anyone justify this? Because they don't care, I said, bitterness rising in my throat. They never have. To them, I'm just a backup plan, a resource, something to dip into when things get tight or when they want to throw a party. It's always about them. Always. Elena was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What are you going to do?" I didn't know. I wanted to scream, to make them understand how deeply they'd hurt me. I wanted to crawl into bed and pretend it wasn't real, to wake up and find the money safely in my account, the betrayal nothing but a nightmare. But beneath all that pain, something harder started to form. The part of me my dad raised, the part that knew right from wrong, that refused to be walked over again. "I'm getting my money back," I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. "Even if I have to call the police." By the time I hung up, my anger had solidified into something like steel. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. Maria and Greg. No, I couldn't even call them my parents right now. Had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I'd tried to be the dutiful daughter, to keep the peace, to believe that family meant forgiveness. But there were limits. There had to be consequences. The next morning I called the bank, even though my hopes were already fading. Maria still had access to my savings because of an old joint authorization we'd set up years ago. Just in case. I'd always meant to update it to take her off, but I'd put it off, thinking it didn't matter. Now it had cost me everything. The bank manager explained that she'd transferred every last dollar out 2 weeks before the party. Never even told me. She'd planned this, orchestrated it, and hadn't lost a wink of sleep. "That's not legal, right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, desperate for some reassurance. The manager hesitated, then said, "It's a gray area. It was a joint account, so technically she had access. But given the circumstances, it's worth taking legal action, especially if the funds were meant for you." "Thank you," I said, writing down every word. "I'll be in touch." My next call was to Chloe, a lawyer Elena had recommended. We met over coffee that afternoon, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I started to feel a glimmer of hope. I told Chloe everything. The savings, the inheritance, Maria's history of borrowing, the way she dismissed my pain without a second thought. Chloe listened intently, taking notes, her face serious. "This isn't just unfair," she said when I finished. "It's potentially criminal. If your fathers will specified the money was for you, and Maria used it for herself, that's a breach of fiduciary duty. Even with joint access, intent matters. And the fact that she made no effort to inform you or repay you makes her actions even more questionable." Her words were like a lifeline, something solid to hold on to in the chaos. For the first time I felt less alone, less helpless. Maybe I could fight this. Maybe I could get justice. Not just for the money, but for everything I'd lost, for all the years I'd been treated as less than, as expendable. Walking home I realized something else. The money mattered, of course, it was my future, my independence, my dream. But it was more than that. It was about respect, about being seen and heard, about drawing a line and saying, "You don't get to do this to me anymore." I was done being the backup plan, the silent partner, the afterthought. I didn't know what would happen next, or how long it would take, or even if I'd win. But I knew I wasn't backing down. Not this time. Maria and Greg had taken enough from me already. Now it was my turn to take something back. She explained that even with joint access, there were boundaries, legal and otherwise, on what she could actually do with those funds. "Especially if you can prove the money was intended for you," she emphasized, her tone measured but reassuring. A tiny ember of hope sparked within me, warming a part of me I thought had gone numb since this whole ordeal began. I straightened in my chair, gripping the armrest, and asked, "So, what's the next step?" "First, we'll file a police report," Chloe said, already opening her laptop. "It's important to have a paper trail from the beginning. Next, we'll send a formal demand for repayment to your stepmother and Greg. If they refuse, which I have to warn you is very likely, we'll escalate to legal action. They can ignore you, but they can't ignore the law." My stomach churned at the idea of police involvement. The thought of dragging my own family through this, of airing our brokenness in front of strangers, made my hands clammy. But as I sat there, memories flashed through my mind. Late nights grinding through double shifts, the vacation plans I'd quietly erased from my calendar, the years I'd spent putting every spare dollar away for my future because I thought it would be safe. 'Cause I thought I could trust them. Anger simmered beneath my anxiety, solidifying my resolve. Maria and Greg had always acted as though my boundaries didn't matter, as if being their daughter meant I was theirs to take from. I was done being complicit. Filing the police report was both terrifying and liberating. Inside the drab, echoing station, I recounted everything to the officer. How my account had been drained, how the money I'd worked so hard to save had vanished in a single thoughtless spree. Chloe had organized all the bank statements, highlighting the withdrawals and purchases I'd never authorized. The officer listened closely, his pen poised over the form. So, to confirm, your stepmother accessed your savings without your permission and spent the money on personal expenses? His voice was professional, but there was a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. Yes, I replied, forcing my voice to stay even. She used it to pay for a party. I didn't even know until it was already gone. He nodded, jotting down notes. That qualifies as unauthorized use of funds. We'll open an investigation and contact both your stepmother and your father. Keep your lawyer updated so she can coordinate with us. I walked out of the station into the cold sunlight, a strange sense of satisfaction settling over me. For the first time I felt like I wasn't just absorbing their blows, I was pushing back. 2 days later Maria called. Her voice was brittle, laced with fury. What the hell is this, Juliana? The police just came to the house asking about your precious savings. It's exactly what it looks like, I said. My voice was calm, almost detached. You took money that wasn't yours. There are consequences for that. Stole. Don't be melodramatic, she snapped. We're family. That money was for all of us. I could hear Greg in the background, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, come on. You really gonna make a federal case out of this? Take your own parents to court. If I have to, I replied, steel threading my words. You made this choice, not me. Maria laughed, but it was hollow. You're being ridiculous. Do you really think this will get you anywhere? We'll see, I said, and hung up before she could say more. While I dealt with their outrage, Chloe moved forward relentlessly. She'd already sent a detailed, formal demand letter to Maria and Greg, listing the exact amount they owed and giving them a clear deadline for repayment. As expected, they didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge the letter. They're digging in their heels, Chloe told me during our next meeting, her expression almost amused. Honestly, it works in our favor. The more unreasonable they act, the more compelling your case becomes. Judges don't look kindly on people who ignore legal demands. And if they keep stonewalling? I asked, anxiety flickering around the edges of my newfound confidence. We escalate, she said smoothly, her certainty unwavering. With the police report, the bank documents, and your father's will, we're in a strong position. They can deny it all they want, but the facts are on your side. Her confidence was contagious. For so long I'd felt helpless, convinced that my voice didn't matter against theirs. Now for the first time I realized I could fight back and win. Maria and Greg had treated me like a child, someone to be manipulated and dismissed. But I was proving to them and to myself that I was no longer willing to play that role. The situation escalated when Greg, in a display of pure arrogance, posted a photo from their anniversary party on social media. He was grinning, arms slung around Maria, both of them dressed to the nines. Her in a rented designer dress, him with a champagne flute raised high. The caption read, "Thanks to everyone for making our night so special." I stared at the image, bile rising in my throat, anger and disbelief mingling in equal measure. They were flaunting the money they'd stolen from me, oblivious to the storm gathering just out of sight. I saved the photo, quietly adding it to my growing stack of evidence. When I showed it to Chloe, she shook her head, a wry smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. They're making it too easy. That photo is practically a confession, proof that they benefited from the funds, that it wasn't some innocent mix-up. We'll use it to drive the point home. A week later, everything reached a breaking point. I was at my kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in my hands, when my phone buzzed. Chloe's voice was brisk, a note of satisfaction in her words. They've been served. The demand letter is now officially part of the legal record, and the police are issuing a formal notice of investigation. It's all in motion. I let out a slow breath, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over me. How do you think they'll react? They'll panic, Chloe said, her tone almost gleeful. And when people panic, they either dig themselves in deeper or they crack under pressure. Either way, they're giving us more ammunition. Predictably, Maria called that afternoon, her voice tight with desperation. Juliana, what are you doing? Are you really going to drag your own family through the courts over this? It was just a misunderstanding. I paused, steadying myself, remembering all the times I'd swallowed my hurt just to keep the peace. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Maria. You took money that wasn't yours, and you didn't even ask. If you thought I was going to just let it go, you were wrong. We didn't steal, she shouted. We borrowed it. It was for the party. You should be proud we could celebrate as a family for once. A bitter laugh escaped me. You didn't borrow anything. You never intended to pay it back. You took what you wanted, and now you're facing the consequences. There was a long, charged silence on the line. For the first time, I sensed real fear beneath Maria's bluster, a dawning realization that she might not be able to bully her way out of this. I felt oddly calm, almost serene. No matter how much they protested, the truth was finally on my side. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that was enough. Celebrate. You mean you want me to parade around, flashing the money I worked years to save, just to impress your friends, while I'm left staring at an empty bank account, scrambling to rebuild everything I lost? No, Maria. That isn't family. That's exploitation, plain and simple. And I won't let you guilt me into pretending otherwise. Greg, always the self-appointed peacemaker, snatched the phone with that saccharine patience he wore like armor whenever he thought he had the moral high ground. You're taking this way too far, kiddo. Don't you see? Nobody's going to back you up here. We're your parents. We've given up so much for you. Isn't it time you showed some gratitude? Gratitude. The word hit me like a slap. My voice began to tremble, but anger surged through me, steadying it. Gratitude for what, Greg? For raiding my savings behind my back. For turning it into a joke when I begged you to pay me back. Well, I don't owe you gratitude for betrayal. The only thing I owe you is accountability. And believe me, you're about to get it. That evening, the doorbell rang and the world shifted. Chloe had warned me not to expect movie drama. No handcuffs, no shouting in the street. Just 2 officers and some serious questions. Still, I couldn't help replaying in my head how Maria and Greg must have looked as the reality of what they'd done finally dawned on them. I imagined their faces, for once stripped bare of smugness and certainty, as the officers explained how serious this really was. Later, my phone rang again. Maria's voice was different now. Thin, brittle, edged with fear. Juliana, please, she pleaded, her composure crumbling. You didn't have to do this. The police. We can talk, can't we? We can fix this together. My heart twisted, but I remembered every time she'd laughed off my pain, every time she insisted I was overreacting. We tried talking, I reminded her, voice cold. You made it clear you didn't care. Now it's out of my hands. Her voice cracked, desperation seeping through. This could ruin us. Do you really want to destroy your own mother? The audacity. Your own mother. As if the fact of biology erased everything she'd done. As if her comfort mattered more than my trust, my future. I didn't do this to you, I told her quietly. You did this to yourself. A week later we met at the mediation table. The room was sterile, but tension buzzed in the air. Chloe sat by my side, a steady anchor, while Maria and Greg shifted in their seats, no longer so certain of themselves. For the first time, I saw them not as unassailable parents, but as people, fallible, scared, and suddenly very small in the face of consequences. The mediator, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, cleared his throat. We're here to address the unauthorized withdrawal of Juliana's savings and to seek a fair resolution. Juliana, would you like to begin? I took a breath, drawing strength from Chloe's calm presence. That account was my future, a down payment for a home. I spent years saving, sacrificing vacations, nights out, everything. Maria and Greg emptied it behind my back to fund a party I never wanted. When I confronted them, they mocked me and refused to make it right. I'm here because I want what's mine returned. Maria's eyes flashed, but the mediator held up a hand. You'll have your chance, Mrs. Grant. She sat back, lips pressed into a tight line. When she finally spoke, her voice quavered, but she clung to her rationalizations. We didn't mean any harm. We thought bringing the family together was more important. Juliana's young, she can earn it back. We never imagined she'd go to these lengths. Chloe didn't let it slide. You didn't just make a mistake. You emptied her account without asking and then dismissed her pain. That's not a family misunderstanding. That's theft. Greg tried to interject, but the mediator's voice was firm. Let's stick to the facts. The documentation shows the funds belonged to Juliana. Mrs. Grant, Mr. Grant, you have two choices. Repay the full amount immediately or face a civil lawsuit and possible criminal proceedings. Maria's composure shattered. Her cheeks flushed, her voice rising. We don't have that kind of money, she snapped. It's gone. We spent it all on the celebration. The mediator nodded, unmoved. Then you'll need to find a way to repay her. If you can't, we'll proceed with legal action. For the first time, Greg looked directly at me. His voice small and uncertain. What if we arrange a payment plan? Chloe's eyes narrowed. That's a step, but Juliana decides the terms. I studied them. Two people who'd always seemed so powerful, now exposed and desperate. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. A payment plan is fine, I said, my voice steady. But I want every detail in writing. If you miss a single payment, the deal is off and we go to court. They both nodded, their bravado gone, replaced by a silent, grudging acceptance. When the session ended, Chloe squeezed my shoulder, her voice warm. You did the right thing. They'll remember this. They'll know you're not someone to walk over anymore. I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle inside me. I would remember too. We signed the mediation agreement before leaving. As I walked out into the fading light, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It was never just about the money, though getting it back mattered. It was about reclaiming my voice, my agency. For too long, I'd let Maria and Greg define my boundaries, convincing myself it was easier to endure than to confront. But this time I'd forced them to face the hurt they'd caused, to answer for their choices. They couldn't laugh it off or sweep it under the rug. Chloe met me by the door, holding out the signed agreement. They'll be making monthly payments. If they falter, we're ready to take it further. I let out a long breath. Thank you, Chloe. I really couldn't have done any of this without you. She smiled. You did the hard part. I just helped you get the justice you deserve. A week later, the first payment landed in my account. It was just a fraction of what I'd lost, but it was tangible proof that I could stand up for myself, that I could demand respect, even from those who claimed to love me most. And as I watched the balance tick up, I realized I'd reclaimed more than just my savings. I'd taken back my dignity, my future, and the knowledge that I never had to shrink myself again. That feeling was worth more than any dollar amount. Seeing the money land back in my account was like someone had finally reached into my chest and switched off the constant, blaring alarm that had been ringing in my mind for months. Relief didn't come all at once. It rippled out, settling into my bones, making me realize how long I'd been clenched tight, bracing for the worst. That night, Elena showed up at my apartment, her smile bright as she balanced a bag of takeout and a bottle of wine. To never letting anyone walk all over you again, she declared, raising her glass with a flourish. I grinned back and clinked mine to hers, the sharp chime somehow sealing a promise to myself. To finally standing up for myself, I said, and the words tasted new, a little unfamiliar but right. We ate on my battered old couch, the city's nighttime hush filtering through the window. Between bites and laughter, I felt the shape of my life shifting, as if I could finally see the outline of who I was without always being pressed into someone else's mold. For years I'd made myself smaller, quieter, so Maria and Greg could take up all the space they wanted. I told myself that was what family did. Sacrifice, compromise, give until there was nothing left. But after everything that happened, I understood. Boundaries weren't just polite suggestions. They were lines that kept me whole, and if I didn't defend them, no one else would. A few days later, my phone buzzed with Maria's name. Her voice, when I answered, was oddly gentle, almost hesitant, a far cry from her usual clipped tone. "Juliana, I wanted to check in," she said, as if we hadn't just spent months fighting across conference tables and in lawyers' offices. I let the silence stretch, refusing to fill it with apologies or soothing words. "Is this about the payments?" I kept my tone even, determined not to let her unsettle me. No, she insisted, the words tumbling out too quickly. "I just wanted to see how you're doing." I almost laughed. She wasn't calling out of concern. She just didn't know how to navigate this new version of me, the one she couldn't control or manipulate with sighs and guilt trips. "I'm fine," I said firmly. "And I expect the next payment on time." She sighed, the sound heavy with practiced disappointment. "We're family, Juliana. I hope one day you can forgive us." Forgiveness. The word hung in the air between us, a demand disguised as a plea. She wanted absolution, but only because facing her own actions was uncomfortable. I wasn't ready to give her what she wanted, not just because she asked for it. "I have to go," I said, and hung up before she could say anything else. For once, her disappointment didn't twist in my gut. Felt lighter. The weeks that followed were a slow rebuilding. It wasn't just my finances I had to repair, it was my sense of self, the belief that I was allowed to take up space, to insist on fairness. I combed through my budget, trimming unnecessary expenses, picking up extra hours where I could. The dream of owning my own place, which had felt impossibly distant, flickered back to life. Maria and Greg's payments didn't fix everything, but each deposit was a small victory, a tangible reminder that I had reclaimed something I'd lost. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to see them suffer. It was about justice, about affirming to myself that I deserved respect, and that I was strong enough to demand it. Months passed. I watched my savings grow, slowly but surely, the numbers ticking upward through my own hard work and those court-ordered payments. Sometimes, when I scrolled through real estate listings late at night, I would let myself imagine what it would feel like to have a home that was entirely mine. I bookmarked a modest, sunlit house outside the city, a little bit of garden, peeling paint on the porch, but space enough for dreams to unfurl. It wasn't glamorous, but it represented something priceless. Security, autonomy, the promise that I wouldn't always be at the mercy of someone else's choices. Maria and Greg kept paying, though I heard through Chloe that they complained, tried to negotiate, claimed hardship. Chloe shut them down without mercy. The agreement was clear. If they defaulted, we'd be back in court, and they knew I wasn't bluffing anymore. Our conversations dwindled to stilted, awkward phone calls, Maria pretending she just wanted to catch up, but always circling back to the money, to her hope that I'd eventually let things slide. "We've learned our lesson," she told me one afternoon, her voice tight with resentment and regret. "I hope we can move past this someday." I didn't sugarcoat my response. "Moving past this starts with you, Maria. Keep your word. Finish what you started." She fell silent, then mumbled a stiff goodbye, the phone clicking off. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel responsible for her feelings or for smoothing things over. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit her comfort. Instead, I felt something new, freedom, relief, a sense of standing on my own 2 feet, unburdened by their expectations. Later, Elena and I went out for dinner, a small celebration just for us. She looked at me over the rim of her glass, her eyes shining. "You know, I've never seen you like this," she said. "So confident. It looks good on you." I felt the truth of her words settle over me, warm and a little startling. "Thanks. I finally get it. Standing up for myself doesn't make me selfish or cruel. Just means I know my own worth. And I'm not willing to compromise that anymore." Elena grinned, clinking her glass to mine. "And you're pretty great," she said, her tone teasing and proud. We laughed, and for the first time in ages, I felt light, like the last of the old shame had finally burned away. I realized that, in the end, I'd gained more than money. I'd reclaimed my self-respect, my voice, my right to be the author of my own story. A few weeks later, I drove out to see that little house I'd saved in my bookmarks. I sat in my car across the street, watching the sunlight slant across the porch, imagining myself inside. Cooking dinner, reading by the window, planting flowers in the yard. It wasn't just a house. It was proof of everything I'd fought for, every hard decision and sleepless night. It was a testament to the strength I'd found, the boundaries I'd built, the hope I'd nursed back to life. As I sat there, I thought of my dad. How hard he worked, how much he sacrificed so I could have choices, so I wouldn't have to depend on anyone who didn't treat me right. Maria and Greg nearly took that away, but they didn't succeed. I knew, deep down, he would be proud of me. Not just for surviving, but for refusing to let anyone define my worth but myself. I started the engine, feeling a quiet certainty settle in my chest. This was my life again. It was finally, irrevocably mine to shape, and I wouldn't let anyone take that away from me again. The future felt wide open, and for the first time in a long time I was ready to claim it.